Hey everyone, welcome to episode number 87 of the Big Time Strength Podcast. Coach Rozier here with you today, guys. I'm really excited. Kind of a new format or couple new features we're presenting here today. We have Coach Miles Clifton on. He's at Luther College. If you're a diehard listener of the podcast, he's been on before with Coach Ali Jenicky. They were on episode number 42. We brought Coach back on here to today. Which I'm really excited about, just to get his perspective on some stuff after it's been about a year since he's been on. So really excited for the episode today. A couple things with that. This is actually being recorded video during the Corona era. Everybody's on Zoom now. So we're going to try out our podcast on Zoom and get this on YouTube. So if you want to actually watch us talk, go for it. It's on YouTube. You can check it out. And a couple other new things we'll debut here in a little bit too. So before we get to Coach Miles and what he's up to, let's talk through our amazing sponsors. So number one, Team Builder. Hewitt and his staff are amazing. If you don't know, they are the leading software for high schools and colleges by providing coaches the ability to write programs online, generate over 13 reports, and even train athletes remotely for side income. If you sign up with code BIGTIME, you will receive a free programming template which works automatically within Team Builder. No more spreadsheets and workout cards to track training maxes. Change day by day. Automate your programming without outsourcing your programming with Team Builder. Hewitt and his staff do an amazing job. And now more than ever, reach out to them because just during this Corona period, if you're listening to this recently, this is April 1st, 2020, everything's remote. And I just actually recorded a little tutorial for our coaches today to where they can get on there and access their athletes. It's been money for us. So check out Team Builder and their staff. They do a tremendous job. Our second sponsor is Powerlift. Powerlift is the leading manufacturer and distributor of heavy-duty strength training equipment for collegiate and high school athletic performance coaches around the world. Powerlift brings over 20 years of experience to the strength conditioning world. All products are manufactured in their state-of-the-art facility in Jefferson, Iowa. They're proud to support all coaches making the big time where they're at. Again, Powerlift, amazing company as well. They're one of the leading manufacturers in our industry. Really, really grateful that they came on as a sponsor. Check them out. Mike Richardson and the Team Builder contact info as well, you can find in our show notes. So, all right, guys, getting to today's episode, let's welcome Coach Miles Clifton. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Miles. Again, episode number 42, he was on, and he gave a really extensive background of kind of his journey so far. So I'm going to ask him to do that again today. He could probably keep it a little bit shorter just because, again, it's already been said once. But just for if you have not listened to that, Miles, why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit of context of what you've done so far and where you're at right now.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me back on, Gage. So, yeah, like I said, just briefly, I guess, since I kind of went through all this once, and I'm sure everybody out there has listened to every episode of this podcast, so they're probably caught up on it. But so right now I'm at Luther College here in Decorah, Iowa. I'm the assistant director of athletic performance and the head of football performance. One of two staff members on staff here. Coach Ali Jenicky is the director of our department, and it's just the two of us working with 19 sports. About 400 athletes, I think, something like that. So we stay pretty busy, like I'm sure a lot of other listeners of this show, if they're small school strength coaches, they know that grind, I guess. So one of your favorite buzzwords there. So figure we throw that in a little bit. But as far as my background, originally was actually, kind of a unique journey into strength and conditioning. Worked for 3 or 4 years after college in the agriculture sector, doing some seed sales and stuff like that, originally from a small rural town in Missouri. So ag was kind of everything. Graduated with a degree in agronomy, realized pretty quick into that that wasn't necessarily what I wanted to spend the rest of my life doing. Had always had a passion for athletics and especially the training side of things. So went back and got my graduate degree in health and physical education at Northwest. Did my GA work with you at William Jewell, and also did a couple intern stints one at Northwest with Joe Quinlan and his staff, and then another at Harvard University with Coach Frazier and Coach Mullen and the rest of that staff out there. So been here at Luther for about a year in this position. And yeah, it's been great so far. Love it up here in Decorah.
Awesome. Well, we'll get into some discussion questions, which, again, Miles has been on before, so we're going to go maybe off the script a little bit. If you're a longtime listener, you know some of the stuff we talk about. So we're getting some new stuff today, which is exciting. But before that, I do want to introduce a new segment we're going to do. It's called What You Drinking. So this is, I'll start off. If you're online, I'll give you, this is my go-to whiskey cup. Yeah, you can't see it. It's a quote by John Wayne. It's called, "I'm here to kick ass and drink whiskey, and I'm about out of whiskey." So that's my favorite cup. But what's in mine today is a little bit of Maker's Mark. Well, Maker's Mark and a little bit of, actually, it's Diet Dr. Pepper is the only mixer I had today, which is actually pretty good. I usually am a Coke guy with it, but we'll go with Diet Dr. Pepper today. Coach, what are you drinking tonight?
Tonight, I am drinking Buffalo Trace Old Fashioned. So
that's money right there.
Yeah, making some fancy cocktails up in here. So
that's how you do in Decorah, Iowa. That's what
absolutely, dude. We drink craft beer and good whiskey. So
Buffalo Trace is good. So we'll throw that segment out every once in a while for the guests who want to participate. Originally, this podcast was scheduled for 7 a.m. We moved it to 7 p.m. in the spirit of not being alcoholics. So moving on with that. Coach, let's start this by, as you said in your intro, it's been about a year on the job now, right? So obviously you've learned a lot since being there at Luther. Why don't you just walk us through maybe some mistakes you've made, or maybe just some things you've learned since being there at Luther? Basically work with all the men's sports except baseball, correct?
Yeah, and so I'll give a quick kind of rundown of all the teams I work with, right? So like you said, we're kind of split right down the middle. Coach Jay works with pretty much all of our most of our female teams: volleyball, women's basketball, women's soccer, softball, and then she's in charge of baseball. But just kind of the way our schedule works out, I work quite a bit with baseball as well. I'm usually leading them once or twice a week, assistant on some other days. So work pretty closely with those guys as well. But I'm in charge of football, men's basketball, men's soccer, wrestling, track and field, women's golf, and we're pretty fortunate. We have a really large intern pool. We've got, actually, I think right before the semester abruptly ended, we were at kind of a high for us of about 15 interns. And so we've got some kids, that have been athletes with us for a few years that are interning now, that know the way we operate. And, some of them have been interning for a couple of years. And so we'll let some of them lead some teams as well. So like women's golf, cross country, swim and dive, tennis, a few of those teams, because we can only train teams for about 2 hours in the morning and 2 to 3 hours in the afternoon. Kind of have to double up a lot. So while Coach Jay and I may be leading another team in the room, a lot of times we'll have an intern leading those teams, and then Coach Jay and I are kind of bouncing back and forth in between. So we're really fortunate just from a scheduling standpoint. We don't have to be around till 7 or 8 at night because we've got some really good interns that we trust to lead some of those teams. So, there's a handful of teams that I write programs for, but we kind of let the interns run with them a little bit and make some of that stuff their own. So just something that's pretty cool that we're able to do up here, and pretty fortunate to have that kind of staffing. So as far as, first year on the job, I was super fortunate. The position that I stepped into, Coach Janicki was in this position for, 2.5 years, I think, before I got here. And Coach Jeff Jones, you guys just had him on the podcast, an episode or two ago, left for Appalachian State, was out there for a year, and is now back at Fairfield High School here in Iowa. But he established a phenomenal program here at Luther. And so when I got here, I was already stepping into a really well-established program, had a lot of buy-in from the coaching staff, the athletes, and was kind of stepping into a well-oiled machine. So for me, it was not necessarily having to spend a lot of time establishing, a culture that I want, or kind of my way of doing things. I was just stepping into a program, and I just kind of had to play catch up a little bit. And so obviously made plenty of mistakes, through that first year, and I will continue to make plenty of mistakes. But for the most part, like I said, stepped into a good situation and have been pretty fortunate to not have to battle some of the things that a lot of coaches battle kind of first job out. So one of the big things, that I feel like I maybe struggled with a little bit when I first got here, and I think this is probably the case for a lot of first time coaches, whenever you get your first full-time gig, was communication with other coaching staffs. It can be pretty easy for me to just kind of be in my little bubble down in the weight room, and not necessarily have a really good open line of communication with the rest of the coaching staffs. Some are, I do a lot better job of communicating with others than others. I don't know why that is necessarily, if it's just, some staffs are a little more proactive in reaching out to me, where I'm not always having to be the one to kind of take the lead on that stuff, because I don't always do a good job of that. But, we had a few instances, especially in the spring. I stepped in kind of middle of the semester, so there wasn't a lot of time for me to kind of get up to speed. I literally showed up, and see, the first night they drugged me up on the stage at their Norse Awards. It's like their big year-end banquet. They drugged me up on the stage and made me do the school chant in front of all 400 student athletes. So that was day one. And then day two, Coach Jay kind of walked me through and introduced me to all the teams. But by the middle of that week, I was pretty much off and going with my teams, and they were already in the middle of a training cycle. So it was really trial by fire, and I was trying to just kind of keep my head above water, so to speak, with learning athlete names, and just trying to get into the flow of the training cycle. I don't think I did a very good job communicating with coaching staffs right off the bat. And that was particularly evident, just one instance. We had a couple football players that were track athletes as well. And, I was in my own little world of thinking, what do I want to do with these guys as far as off-season training, and thinking football only, and was not communicating openly with the track and field staff. And, we made the mistake of kind of relying on our athlete to let us know what was going on out on the track. And, we start seeing some soft tissue stuff pop up with a few of these guys. And I start digging in a little more, and I start finding out that their, main heavy volume sprint day is coming on the back end of my heavy lower body day. I had the guys in either at 6 a.m. or 3 p.m. squatting heavy, split squat heavy, and then they're going out and doing a high volume sprint work on the track later that day. Like, yeah, no wonder we started having some soft tissue stuff popping up. And that was just purely, a fact of I was in my own little world, and I wasn't openly communicating with the track staff. And so that's something that I've really had to make a more concerted effort to make sure that I'm really reaching out and talking with those guys, and just making sure we're staying on the same page. Because at the Division III level, you do have a lot of kind of crossover athletes that are playing multiple sports, and so you may be in the middle of off-season training with one of them, but the rest of them are trying to be in season with track or baseball or whatever it is. So communication is important in any situation, but that was one thing I definitely have had to work on, and still something I'm working on. I feel like I'm doing a little better with it, but can always continue to get better at that. And then the other big one is just trying to do everything, or trying to do too much. It can be really easy for me anyway to read about something or learn something new and think, oh man, I want to find a place to stick that into my program, and just continuing to try to just do more and more and more instead of simplifying things. And I think we had some we had some guys kind of getting run down a little bit in the spring just because I maybe wasn't monitoring that stuff as closely as I should have. So, those are kind of a couple real big areas that I've seen some issues with that I definitely think I can be doing a better job with. And we'll continue to kind of battle that going forward. So.
Yeah, and I think communication with coaching staff is one I struggle with too. Not necessarily struggle with, but like you said, for whatever reason, it's easier to communicate to some coaches more than others. Um, and so what I've started doing is like I've just been straight up honest with them. Like, listen, ex-coach, like sometimes I just forget. I'm like,
Yeah.
so I'm gonna like please. 'Cause sometimes I feel like sport coaches, especially in our roles where we're understaffed, if you have good coaches, they like some of them don't want to reach out to you because they're like, I don't want to bother him. Like he's got a lot of stuff going on, and that's what I found out with some of our coaches. And I told them like, no, like more communication is better. So make sure like
Yeah.
I'm going to put on you actually to communicate to us, and not to say that we're not going to communicate back to you, and this gives me an excuse to just not do my job, but
Right.
put it on them a little bit to help us with that communication that we're not always the ones reaching out. And then another thing I thought about, and you haven't mentioned on this, but we're really good friends, obviously, and I know your background and know the experience you had at Harvard. So when I thought about the school chant on day one, and I know how important or something you took from that Harvard internship is how Coach Mullins puts you guys in really awkward situations all the time.
Yeah.
So when you were ready for that, were you prepared for that school chant when they put you in that position because of your Harvard internship?
Yeah. I
Back to
mean,
that.
yeah. So, we kind of talked about this when we had that meeting with your staff the other day, where I talk about leaning into the awkward. Like that's kind of become my mantra a little bit, and I definitely developed that during that internship out there because it was just constant. Like, I mean, a lot of the stuff they had us do out there was absolutely nothing to do like related to performance or anything. Like he might call you out at the end of a breakdown and be like, hey, Coach Miles, dance move of the day, and would make you dance in front of, 40, 50 athletes that you don't know day one. Like he didn't have a problem doing that. And so I don't know if it's mistrust or what, but now I just expect that everybody's going to try to put me in an awkward situation at some point. And so I went into that night like with the expectation that there could be a chance that I get called up on the stage because I literally just started. I didn't expect to have to do a chant, but once I got up there, it was like, we're here. We might as well lean into it and just embrace it. So, yeah, I mean that was a great experience out there, and I've just gotten really good at being okay with looking like an idiot.
No, that's really good because so one of my things is I always expect someone to try to do that to me as too, whether it's probably obviously not going to happen, but you never know. So like if we go, like if we're in Branson, Missouri, and you're going to the magic show, and they're going to call people up on stage, I'm sitting 30 rows back in the middle of the aisle. I'm not in the middle of the section. I'm not on the aisle seat because those
That's
are the people
right.
who get called on stage. So, uh,
Yeah, I
all
love
right, moving on here. Let's talk a little bit of training. So, obviously, you probably led your team right up to spring ball, if I had to guess. That's kind of how most people's spring happened here before Corona hit. So maybe walk us through. Let's just go with football. Kind of what your football off-season training looked like, and you don't have to go through every single set and rep, but maybe walk us through a week, what you're doing Monday through Friday with your team there.
it. Yeah. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Literally, the last week that we got cut off at training was kind of going to be our test week. And so it's literally the week that the guys are hyped up for and pumped up for. We've been hyping it up for a couple weeks, and then didn't get to do it. So that was kind of a major bummer. But I'd felt pretty good about the off season that we had so far. Like I said, one of the things that I think I did a little too much of last spring in particular was trying to do everything and not keeping things simple. Um, And so whenever I met with our football coaching staff at the end of the off season, we sat down, and our head football coach is a super detail oriented guy and is super analytical. And so we had literally like 3 or 4 days worth of 4-hour meetings where we were just pouring over like this list of questions that he had about what we thought about our team, what we could improve on. Um, and, like physically, one of the things we really identified, and this comes with, our football team this fall was, we had approximately 80 guys on the roster, but about 50 to 55 of them, actually it's probably higher, probably 55 to 60 of them were freshmen and sophomores, and we only had about 20 to 25 juniors and seniors. So just naturally, with any underclassmen, you're probably coming in undersized. And so just looking across the board, we were undersized by probably 20 pounds at every position. So a big emphasis for us, kind of coming into the off season, was trying to put some weight on these guys. We had a lot of injuries this year that I was scratching my head on. It was a long fall, to be honest with you. I was, it just felt like we had something popping up all the time. And the biggest thing that I could put my finger on, besides it just being one of those years, is we had a lot of contact injuries that maybe just happened because we're getting pushed around because we're, 20 pounds light at every position. So that was a really big emphasis for us going into the off season. And so my first 2 months of training with these guys, we maybe only had 6 exercises that we were doing on a day. We might have 3 supersets. I was trying to keep it really simple, but we were doing a ton of tempos, eccentrics, isos, anything we could do to increase time under tension, and preaching the heck out of nutrition. Kind of took, we only had about a 2-week period, I think, from when the guys came back postseason until, they left for winter break. And so during that time, it was basically teach them the winter break lift and spend, 15 minutes at the end of every lift talking about some topic on nutrition. Just trying to give these guys some ammunition a little bit so that when they were back home and they maybe had better resources as far as food goes, to try to put on some good quality weight over the first couple months of the off season here. So we were doing a 4-day split, kind of 2 upper focus days, 2 lower focus days. The lower focus days, we usually did some kind of, linear speed development on those days. And while we were doing a lot of heavy eccentrics and isos, I knew guys were going to be sore. And so pretty much everything was acceleration based, doing a lot of, 10 to 15 yard sprints, some resisted stuff, some plyos, some stuff like that, just some really base level, nothing too fancy. But we typically lead off every lift with something like that. And then, like I said, our main lower body movement for us is usually some kind of split squat variation. And so we were doing, 5-6 second eccentrics, isos, stuff like that. Main upper body day would be a bench press. Again, tempoed. On our secondary upper body day, it was really just a bro sesh day. A lot of higher rep, kind of lower weight. Just let the guys get a little bit of a pump. But then once we got the guys back, we do a January term where all of our freshmen are required to be on campus, but a lot of our juniors and seniors have the opportunity to do internships or study abroad, class credit, stuff like that. So we had about probably 2/3 of our team on campus through January. So again, tried to keep stuff really simple because, it's easy to really want to dive in and do some intricate programming. But when your athletes are off campus and you can't have eyes on them, you kind of have to be realistic with what you think, one, they can reasonably do with the equipment they have available, and two, what will they actually do and train hard doing, right? And so tried to keep those first couple blocks coming back off the season pretty simple and straightforward. And then, moving forward from there, our next 2, 6 to 8 weeks was really kind of heavy strength focus. All of our main movements, we were pretty much staying anywhere from about probably 2 to 4 reps on most of our main movements, getting heavy, and starting to, and I tried to put a big focus on our speed development too. Yes, we wanted to put some good quality weight on these guys, but we can't afford to be getting slower in the process. I think if you lean a little too heavy on the barbell and not enough on the speed work, that can happen pretty quick. So, we continued with a 4-day-a-week lift, but, 3 days a week, we were doing some type of speed development. We had like 2 linear days and kind of 1 multi-direction agility-based day. And then on our 4th day, mixed in something, for lack of a better term, I called it a coordination circuit. But another area that I saw a lot of us getting injuries with was just when we were interacting with the ground. A lot of AC sprains, broken bones, just kind of freak injuries that I thought, maybe if we get caught in an awkward situation and we're a little more coordinated and we know how to interact with the ground, maybe some of that stuff doesn't happen. I don't know. I was kind of just trying to find any solutions I possibly could for some of those situations. So coordination circuits looked like, some altitude drops, some kind of landing mechanic drill, some hurdle hops. We were doing some kind of bear crawl variation, whether it was, linear, lateral, mixing some of that stuff in, just some basic running mechanics, some A skips, A marches, A runs. And then we did some tumbling. And so we actually did some forward rolls, some safety rolls, some stuff like that. And, we would do, kind of 4 stations, move the guys in some kind of circuit fashion, 2 to 3 rounds, took about 15 minutes, would kind of get their heart rate up a little bit, kind of developing a little bit of an aerobic base, but just working on some general coordination with the guys too. And I really liked it. We saw a lot of guys improve tremendously over the course of 8 weeks. I told the guys, especially with the tumbling, I didn't necessarily coach it up a lot, but I told them the ground would give them really good feedback if they were doing it correctly or not. They picked up on that pretty quick. Whenever they smacked their back into the ground instead of rolling gracefully, they knew that they were doing something wrong. So guys definitely improved in a lot of that stuff, and you could just tell they were starting to move better. So we did that before our main upper body day, and then they'd go in, bench, do like a weighted chin, some kind of horizontal row, mix in all of our other accessory stuff. Something that, kind of the way we train up here, and Jeff Jones talked about this a little bit. We're basically operating a very similar program to what he implemented here. That's, you talked about bodybuilding the upper and athlete the lower. We tend to stay worrying more about quality of movement, especially with our lower body stuff. Err on the side of a little too light and move with greater intent. All about bar speed, low volume, great intent, great detail with every rep. And then some of that upper body stuff, we let the guys bro out a little bit and just kind of chase the pump a little bit. So just as a very overarching view of what those days look like, basically we had 2 pretty high intensity lower body days, and then 2, higher volume, lower intensity upper body days kind of through that 6 to 8 weeks. And we were trying to build out sprint volume too. Had a couple unfortunate incidences where my top end speed days, I was taking the guys to the SRC, our indoor track space, to find out that they had squeegeed the floor at 5:30 that morning. And so we walk in there and it was just as slick as could be. And that was when I was starting to build the guys up to 30, 40 yards at a pop on their sprints. And so I was wanting to time some 40s, going into spring break here. And that ended up getting nixed because we never really built up over 30 yards. So, and then we didn't get to test anyway. So, had a few curveballs thrown at us, but one thing we do all the time is time sprints. We've always got our timing systems out. One, to drive intent, and two, it's fun for the guys to compete against themselves, week to week. So instead of lining guys up and having them sprint and guys getting out of whack, leaning at the line, trying to beat somebody next to them, they can just line up and run against the clock. So we were seeing, some pretty good and, a lot of guys, gaining 10 to 15 pounds over the course of the spring, and sprint times were either holding steady or starting to drop. So I was feeling pretty good going into testing week here, but now it may be a while before we really get to see what if that stuff was successful or not. But that's kind of a broad overview of what we were doing with the guys here in this off season.
Yeah, and it sucks. Just how everything turned out. But I do want to ask you on the time sprints. So how are you guys managing that data? Do you guys have timers? Did you mention that? Or
Yeah, so we do. We do have timers. What is it, Brower?
yeah.
Yeah, just we've got it. We've got a couple sets of gates, and so we can time. Generally, I used to do like the handheld start, let the lasers finish them. Time 20s, time 10s. I've gone to more and more fly 10s with just varying degrees of run-ins, just for the fact that it's going to be more consistent because it's laser started and laser finished. As far as managing that data, Division III, we technically cannot, I can't have a spreadsheet with all those guys' names and their data recorded through the off season. We can do that kind of stuff in season, but everything when the athletes are out of season is optional. So if we do stuff like that, it could technically be construed as taking attendance. So we can't do that stuff. But what I generally do with those guys is we've got our training cards. And so generally somewhere at the top of their training card for the day, we'll have, if we have the jump mat out, we'll have best vert jump. If we have the timing, the sprints out, we'll have, best 10-yard fly with whatever yard running. And then we let the guys track it that way. Like I said, as much as anything, it's not necessarily data that I'm collecting, but it's an option there for these guys to track themselves, see if they're PRing, monitoring that stuff on their own a little bit. So we just give them the option to write that stuff in on their own card, and we can kind of track it that way. Through the season, I did monitor vertical jump, and I rotated every week. We did like a 10-yard sprint, a 20-yard sprint, and a 10-yard fly with a 10-yard run in. And we just cycled that through the season just to kind of monitor the guys to see if we were starting to see guys really trail off, getting slower, or if we were still gaining speed through the season. Because we did a lot of just micro-dosing our speed reps in season, kind of part of their performance prep every day at practice. We do our mountain climber flow, a little bit of mobility stuff, and then we do a few acceleration, like 10, 15-yard acceleration runs. And then we would do 2 20-yard sprints at the end of every performance prep. Try to give them, a minute and a half in between so that they could get full recovery, maximal intent. They were doing that 3 to 4 days a week of practice. So actually saw a lot of our guys either maintaining sprint times all the way through the end season, or several guys even getting faster as we got to the end of the season. So that was something that I really liked.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And thanks for going through all that. That's, again, he mentioned a couple times, Jeff Jones lined out some of his training philosophies and stuff that kind of carried over to what they're doing now at Luther. But I do want to ask you real quick, just kind of your mindset, because going back to your process here, or your lead up to where you got to Luther, you're with me at William Jewell College, where I mean, we're not doing anything super special or anything by any means, but it definitely is maybe different than what Allie and Jeff Jones do at Luther. And honestly, from my perspective, we are kind of pushing towards that a little bit. But maybe just talk a little bit about your mindset about um, that process of just learning different styles of training.
Yeah. So, just for anybody that, like I said, if you haven't listened to, of course, I don't know if Coach Jones really got into it a whole lot on his podcast, but the way we train at Luther, the way he tends to lean in his training is a pretty heavy unilateral emphasis, and there's a couple myths, I guess, that seem to be floating around whenever I see people arguing on the internet all the time about unilateral versus bilateral, whatever. People seem to think it's like this all or nothing mentality where it's like we're only going to train unilateral or we're only going to train bilateral. It's not the case for us up here. Our main lower body movement is always a unilateral variation. Bilateral deficit research, you can dig into that. I'm sure any strength coaches that have been around for any time at all have listened to Mike Boyle, his death to the back squat, all that stuff. Bilateral deficit, there's a lot of research out there that proves that you can argue one way or the other, how much the back leg helps in a split squat or a rear foot elevated split squat variation. But I think anybody that's actually trained that way for an extended period of time can just anecdotally tell you that you can lift more weight on an individual leg than you can, right, the sum of the two legs. I can rear foot elevated split squat in a front rack position, 225 for several easy reps, where the best back squat that I've ever back squatted is like 410 pounds. And that's a pretty modest example. There's a lot more extreme examples out there of people who've been training in that manner for a lot longer. I can just say, me personally training that way, I hit a lifetime PR on my vert just a couple weeks ago. Haven't back squatted in months, and have back squatted very sparingly since I got up here. Have kind of moved to that more unilateral focus, and just generally speaking, I feel better. I feel faster. I feel more explosive. I think it's a safer way to train the lower body heavy. You're sparing your spine a little bit because you're using less load, but you can overload a single leg more. That was something that was tough for me when I first got here, because I do love the feel of a heavy barbell on my back. I enjoy back squatting. I enjoy front squatting. I like putting, 3 or 4 plates on the bar and trying to take it for a ride. But I thought that I would miss it more than I do now that I've been in it for a year and watched our athletes train. I thought we might be missing something from having, kind of a max out squat day. I'll just say, like, the intensity in the room can be just as high for a split squat variation with these guys as it can with a back squat. Like, just because it's a different movement variation doesn't mean that the guys still can't train it hard, train it heavy. And just generally speaking, we don't see a lot of new low back issues develop with guys through that we do trap bar deadlift. I try to preach at the guys a lot. That's kind of our main bilateral lower body movement. Really like it, one, because it's very flexible for people with different body types. You got long limbs, short torso, or long torso, short limbs. It allows you to get into a good back position where you can still train the lower body heavy on 2 legs. I do try to really preach at our guys to err on the side of being lighter with that movement, and really locking in their technique, because it is one where we can start to see, if you're not locked in, dialed in, you can start to get some back issues with a deadlift. So I would say most of the year I probably train that a little more sub max and a little more for power. But there will be times during the year where we train that really heavy too, and let the guys work up to some heavy doubles and singles. But again, kind of going back, like, a lot of people think, if you're the unilateral guy, it's because you're afraid of putting a heavy barbell on your back. and you just want to do some sissy PT, AT stuff, all the people that I know that are leaning that direction now are doing it, one, because they can train their lower body heavier, right? If you believe in the bilateral deficit stuff, and then two, it's just a safer movement for your lower back because there's just simply less load. And so that kind of seems like a win-win to me. I don't know. Like I said, I don't miss the back squatting, front squatting stuff that we always used to do. I've seen a lot of really good things out of our guys doing what we do now. As far as everything else, we don't hang clean. That's not necessarily because we don't think the hang clean's a good movement. It's just kind of a, what's our return on investment as far as our time goes? Are there some things that the hang clean maybe offers that, a loaded trap bar jump doesn't? Maybe. But for an athletic population, I think we can get enough of the good stuff out of that movement in significantly less time, less of a time investment as far as teaching athletes how to do it. And so it's kind of a no-brainer for us in that manner. We might spend, realistically, if you're really good at teaching it, maybe a couple months before you feel like you've got some people proficient. But, depending on your athlete, it could be 6 months to a year before you got these guys really cleaning proficiently, where I can probably put some dumbbells in their hands or put them on a light trap bar and let them do some hurdle jumps, some basic plyometrics, broad jumps, and get a lot of the same benefits in, a fraction of the time. So athletes have a lot of other competing demands. Where do we want to spend our time? And we've just kind of decided that we'd rather spend it on loaded jump variations for our power development than we would teaching them how to hang clean. But otherwise, we're going to pull more than we push. Going to hammer the posterior chain. Going to coach really high quality movement. Detail and intent is something that I talk about with our guys till I'm blue in the face. Caring more about quality of movement and less about quantity, and just hammering that kind of stuff over and over again, making sure we have a high energy training environment, make sure the guys and gals have fun when they come in the room. So in that sense, not a lot different, but it's just kind of on that unilateral front, where we maybe vary a little bit from what I've done at Jewel or at Harvard or at Northwest.
Right. And that's a pretty good segue into our next topic we want to talk about is, when you get into industry, everybody thinks, back squat's king, right? Like you got a back squat or you're wasting your time. So I think we've all gone through these things through our development as a coach of like things you learned early on, or really were just told early on, like these are true, believe in them. And then as you progress through coaching and just real world experience, you realize maybe like, okay, maybe that's not right. Is there anything that you have learned in the past year or year and a half, two, whatever, that is along those lines of like, you thought this was true and then you're questioning it now?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, that would be kind of the low hanging fruit is, you don't have to squat heavy to run a well-rounded program. Like I said, that's still a movement that we don't train the back squat, but we train the squat pattern. We do a ton of like tempos and like 10-second eccentric, 10-second ISO with like a 2 kettlebell front rack just for like mobility purposes. And we still think it's an important pattern to train. We just don't train it maximally, if that makes sense. So, that would be kind of the big one for me. I remember when I was at Harvard, right? So that would have been kind of after my first year at Jewel, was at Harvard, and I was talking with one of the coaches out there, and he was talking about potentially going away from any kind of like front or back squat variation with his basketball team and maybe just doing like a trap bar deadlift. And I just remember thinking like, man, that's crazy. Like, how can you not be back squatting or front squatting, like it's the king of all lifts. Like that was just kind of mind blowing for me. And I thought the same thing a little bit when, when I got up here and was talking with Allie, and, she was telling me there's not really any situation where she ever sees them utilizing a front or a back squat. And then after getting, settling into it a little bit and training for a year, realize like it's a tool, right? Like your body doesn't necessarily know that you've got a barbell across your back, or that you've got the weight in your hands, or that you've got 1 foot set behind it. Like you train angles and positions, and so at the end of the day, like as long as you're training some kind of knee dominant movement, as long as you're training some kind of hip dominant movement where we're targeting all of our muscles, all of our movement patterns, the way we're loading the movement isn't really that important, right? The body just knows stress. So that was kind of a big one for me. And then the other thing, and I alluded to this a little bit earlier, was I used to have this idea that our job as strength coaches was to see how much we could get away with making our guys do. Like, how far can we push them without them breaking? Where now, being a year into it and just seeing all the variables that can pop up with everything else that they're doing training wise, I'm on the other end of the spectrum where I'm thinking, how little can I do with these guys and still get a training effect? So instead of, how much can I get away with, it's how little can I get away with now. And I think that's been something big for me, just especially in this off season with our guys. I would say I've reduced our training volume quite a little bit. I don't have accurate numbers to say exactly how much that is, but I have scaled back our volume. And like I said, again, focusing more on quality of movement and less on just shoving as much junk volume as I can into a session.
Well, I think that's a great point because, 4 or 5 episodes, Trevor Florendo was on. He was at Colorado School of Mines.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about basically the same thing. And he was talking about push bands, how they're using some velocity-based training stuff, but it's ultimately the same concept. He said on some days they had dropped their overall volume by, on some days, up to 60% compared to the previous off season, and how velocity-based training was helping them just promote intent and how every rep's important in those things,
Mm-hmm.
and how their numbers had just skyrocketed.
Yeah.
I think that is just I don't know, that's just I don't know, I don't want to say unpopular, but it's just not the common way of thinking. What you said
Not the
earlier is
grind.
it's not the grind, exactly. And that's how far can we push them without breaking them is probably the norm, I would say, with probably most coaches, and I fall into that category certainly at some times as well. I think we all do. But I think a key to that too, you mentioned earlier, is your coaches as well. Is I imagine that to do that effectively, your sport coaches have to be bought into that, and it's our job as well to educate them on why you're doing it this way. Because most sport coaches, if I had to guess, would be like, bury him into the ground.
Yep.
More is better all the time, bury him. And then you're going with this minimum approach. The coach has got to buy into it. If the coaches buy into it, it's easy for the athletes to buy into it. Is that what you've seen at Luther?
Yeah. So, like I said, we've been really fortunate. Like I said, I stepped into a really good situation where Coach Jones and Coach Jay had, 2 to 3 years where they had kind of established their program. And I know just the way they trained in the start rubbed, the coaching norm rubbed some of these guys a little bit wrong. But really quickly they saw their athletes getting faster and being healthier. And so the minute you start to see results like that, people bought in pretty quick. And we're really fortunate here at Luther that we've got a lot of progressive minded coaches where they're not afraid to go against the norm. our football staff, our football coach is very proactive in making sure that we're doing everything we can to keep our guys healthy. We don't necessarily have to be running 300-yard shuttles when we come into fall camp just to see if we can bury these guys in a really non-sport specific manner, just for mental toughness or to see if they've been doing stuff over the summer. We've got a lot of coaches that are really, and like I said, that's just one example, but all of our coaching staffs are really supportive of what we do. And they are kind of, not necessarily hands off, but they trust that we know what we're doing and that we've got the best interest of the athlete at heart. And they kind of let us do our thing, always checking in and kind of keeping tabs on what we do. But we don't really have coaches trying to dictate to us as far as, yeah, you need to be running them into the ground right now, or we need to be doing this. Like, we'll talk about general training qualities, and they trust that we know how to get the adaptations that they're after for, whatever time of the year it is. So we are super fortunate in that regard. We really don't butt heads with our sport coaches a lot in that regard. They're pretty supportive of what we do. So, and yeah, like I said, if the sport coaches are on board and you're delivering that same message from our side and from their side, that's all the athletes know. And like I said, right now, we're graduating this spring, the first class of athletes that have only known, Coach Jones and Coach Jay's system. So every athlete that comes in now, they've got athletes 3 years ahead of them that have been in the system and can preach to the fact that this works, buy in, train hard, you're going to see results.
Well, that's awesome. And you guys got a great system rolling there, and excited to see what you guys got moving forward too. And I appreciate you and Allie, and I enjoyed listening to Jeff earlier on his podcast as well. We mentioned a few times. But with this, I appreciate you spending your time here tonight, Coach. But let's wrap this up. It's got 4 quick questions for you, and we'll get moving on here. Sound good?
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Number 1, what's the we all got plenty of our time on our hands right now, right? So what's the TV show or movie series or whatever you're binging right now?
Ooh, okay. Well, I haven't gotten started on it yet, but apparently everybody's all about this Tiger King show.
Oh my God.
So I'm gonna have to check that one out. But I've been watching kind of before this. I had gotten into Homeland, and so I'm kind of working my way through that a little bit. And then the regular, if I need a break, there's always Parks and Rec, The Office, That 70s Show, New Girl, Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Like, I've got a whole list of shows that I can just mindlessly watch for 20 minutes or something at a pop. So
yeah. What's Homeland on? Is that what like network is that on?
You can get it on Hulu.
Okay. I've heard good things about that one, so I'm gonna look at that.
Yeah, I'm through the first couple seasons. It's really good.
And my wife would strongly recommend Tiger King. Ashley loves it.
If Ashley loves it, I'm in.
That's what I figured. All right. You shared this with my staff. We had you on a staff call earlier last week. But what's an embarrassing moment you've had as a coach in front of your athletes?
Oh, yeah. So do you want me to get both of them?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, let's do both. Okay, so first one, and this is one that I think most athletic performance strength coaches can probably relate to. When you're yelling at the top of your lungs all the time, at some point, your voice is going to cut out. And at Jewel, the Maybe Center is right outside the weight room doors for people who've never been there. And Maybe Center's like 4 all-purpose courts and then the hardwood. So there's a huge amount of space in there. And in the spring, winter months, it's not exactly warm in Kansas City. So there's, softball, track, baseball, basketball. We're trying to run speed groups, whatever, out on the court. So there's, a couple hundred athletes at any given time running around in the Maybe Center. And I was yelling at somebody. I don't remember what it was for or who it was, but it was right in the heart of busy time in there. And I went to yell something and my voice cut out like a 13-year-old boy going through puberty. And it was there in front of everybody for everyone to hear it. So that was, plenty embarrassing. But then my next one, and this was disaster averted because I could have knocked myself out cold on this one. But I was demoing like a med ball deadlift throw or a med ball scoop toss for height for our men's soccer team at Jewel. And I tossed that med ball up in the air, and then I took a step forward just to continue talking to the guys. And that med ball did not track like I thought it was going to. And it came down and it hit me on the shoulder, just grazed my shoulder. But if it had been 6 inches to the right, it would have hit me square on my head. About an 18-pound med ball probably would have knocked me out cold. So that was another pretty embarrassing moment that I kind of dodged the bullet on a little bit.
Yeah, I didn't see the voice crack one, but I was able to witness the med ball one, which was funny. I remember just kind of watching. I was like, man, that was, I don't know if he meant to do that or not. That's probably kind of cool, but
cutting it really close.
Cutting it close. What's a book you're diving into right now?
Speed Strength, Joel Smith. That's been an awesome book. I would say over the last year, probably my biggest area of interest, just trying to read more about, is speed development in general. I follow Tony Holler on Twitter, like I'm sure a lot of people do, and love all the stuff he puts out on the Track Football Consortium. And but listening to the Just Fly podcast and Joel Smith's stuff, I really enjoy everything he's putting out, and his book is awesome. Breaking down kind of the biomechanics of what takes place whenever you're sprinting, and how what you're doing in the weight room can translate to what you're doing as far as speed work. And it's really interesting. We can just kind of put a blanket statement over like, oh, squat, get stronger, you're going to get faster. Well, the body's not that simple necessarily. And the way you do things, as it turns out, is really important. The way you produce force matters, especially when it comes in regards to sprinting and speed. So that book has been really fascinating. I'm probably halfway to 2/3 of the way through it. But I can tell it's going to be a book that I go back through, multiple times again and really dive into. So it's a great resource for anybody that's wanting to learn more about linear speed.
Not to extend this out any longer, but if I had to answer the things I was always told but kind of question now, you just mentioned it for me. It's how do you get faster? How do you jump higher? Well, get stronger. I was always told that, and that's true, obviously, to an extent.
It's true for people who've never trained.
Right. So it took me a long time to figure out, like, it's not true.
Yeah.
Why do we keep saying that? Like,
yeah.
It's true to an extent, obviously, to a point, but like at some point, it's not true anymore.
Right. It's not worth the training energy that you put into it to try to eke out more on a squat or more on bench. Like, why the hell does anybody ever need to try to eke out more on a bench? Like as far as being an athlete, like, it's not what wins out on the field. Like, let's try to do things that transfer a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, last one. Small school coach who you think does a great job deserves a shout out.
Ooh, okay. Yeah, gosh. I mean, pretty much everybody that I know that's at a small school has been on this podcast at some point. So we'll go back. This is somebody, obviously that's been talked about a lot on your podcast, but Joe Quinlan at Northwest. The more I get out and see how other programs operate, he was my first intern experience there at Northwest. I just appreciate more and more the attention to detail that Joe puts into everything that he does. Like, as something as mundane or as simple as like the way you set up the room and the way you transition in between exercises. He was always super critical and detailed with the way we set that stuff up as interns, because it mattered for the flow of the room and making sure that he had the training environment that he wanted. So I really appreciate everything that Joe did as far as trying to create a really good training environment, but then the way he invests in his athletes and his coaches. Like, he's just a great human being, great guy to be around. So, another shout out for Joe Q.
Yeah, no doubt. And I'm sure people are starting to wonder by this point, if you've been listening a while, like, why hasn't Joe Quinlan ever been on the podcast? He'll be on soon. We're working it out. We've waited a while on purpose for it. So
It's the one everybody's been waiting for.
That's right. That's probably going to be our number 100 episode or something, make it special. So
there we go.
All right, man. Yeah, appreciate it. Again, if you want to hear more from Coach Miles, episode number 42 with Coach Allie, he's mentioned a couple times in here. She does a fantastic job. But man, just keep grinding away up there at Luther. We all know this is a crazy time for everybody during this Corona period, but stay sane. Let us know any more good TV shows you're watching. But
got them, man. I got lots of them. So
yeah, I'm trying to watch like six of them at one time right now. It's not working out great for me right now. So, but anyway, man, appreciate you coming on, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.